Test. Welcome to Oakhurst Presbyterian Church. We are truly honored and blessed to host the Theology after Gaza panel discussion. And so we thank you all for coming tonight. To ensure your comfort this evening, everyone's probably may need to use the bathroom at some point. So there are restrooms behind me through these doors, first landing to your right. There's also restrooms if you go out through the back of the sanctuary, down those steps there. There's restrooms there as well. Please, please, please make yourself feel at home. If there's anything that you need at all, please do not hesitate to ask myself or anyone else from Oakhurst, as it is our job to welcome you and to serve you here at Oakhurst. Please remember that after the panel discussion, there will be, underneath us is our fellowship hall. You can get there, again, going through these back doors, down those steps, as well as out this door down to the bottom steps. There will be more information in the fellowship hall after this, as well as a time for us to fellowship. Amen? Amen.
So we're going to have a very special introduction this evening from our good friend Thandi, who comes to us from Western Cape in South Africa. So if you could direct yourself to the screen and listen in, Thandi is going to introduce us to the topic this evening.
South Africa. My name is Thandi Gamedze. I'm based at the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice at the University of the Western Cape. I would have loved to be joining in person, but I'm very much with you in spirit. It's an honor to be part of this event. Theology after Gaza is a really key theological intervention in these times, and so my deep gratitude and congratulations to Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahib and all the contributing authors. As a way of introducing this event, I would like to share a little bit about the South African Kairos document, a document that could perhaps alternatively be titled Theology After Apartheid. The Kairos document was produced in apartheid South Africa in a time of worsening crisis and repression. The apartheid state, then led by P.W. Botha, instituted a state of emergency in July 1985. This ushered in a period of deepened crisis in what was already a very dark time, preceded by decades and in fact centuries of prior colonial and apartheid oppression, land theft, and all kinds of other forms of racialized oppression and subjugation. The state of emergency itself was marked by mass detentions of those involved in any kinds of anti-apartheid resistance, the deployment of huge numbers of police and soldiers into black townships, extreme levels of state violence and repression, and draconian clampdowns on the media and the sharing of any information. Within this context, among socially engaged people of faith, there was a sense of growing dissatisfaction, frustration, and anger with the role of the church and its theologies in this crisis. This led an organization called the Institute for Contextual Theology to convene and host a meeting with a group of church people and theologians to reflect on what was going on in the country with a specific focus on the church. This meeting sparked a process of ever-widening circles of social analysis and theological reflection, which culminated in the publishing of the Kairos document on the 25th of September 1985, 40 years ago. The document grappled deeply with questions about how what was claimed to be the same faith and same sacred text could inspire such vastly different actions, responses, and orientations. This contestation is captured in the following quote from early on in the document. Both oppressor and oppressed claim loyalty to the same church. They are both baptized in the same baptism and participate together in the breaking of the same bread, the same body and blood of Christ. There we sit in the same church, while outside, Christian policemen and soldiers are beating up and killing Christian children or torturing Christian prisoners to death, while yet other Christians stand by and weakly plead for peace. From this starting point, which recognizes the church as a contested space, The document provided a sharp critique of the various kinds of theology emerging from the South African church at the time. This critique differentiated between what it referred to as state theology and church theology. The document understood state theology as the theology birthed out of the Dutch Reformed Church and adopted by the apartheid state. This theology intentionally and overtly used scripture and Christianity to sanction and theologically justify the racism and deep injustice of apartheid. The document then saw church theology as emerging primarily from the English-speaking churches of the time. This theology, while claiming to be against apartheid, failed to analyze and understand the roots of it, and because of this, plastered over its realities with abstract and ill-fitting spiritual solutions, which only acted to sustain the injustice. For example, church theology prescribed reconciliation as a solution, while failing to name and address the social, material, and political injustices that made any kind of substantial reconciliation impossible. The document then went on to call the church to what it termed prophetic theology, drawing on the witness of the Old Testament prophets. According to the document, a starting point of such a theology was a commitment to a deep social analysis, a reading of the signs of the times, and a commitment to reading scripture from this starting point with the aim of discovering what faithfulness looked like within the reality of injustice in which the authors found themselves. Within this, the document saw prophetic theology as refusing to be neutral and embodying a commitment to explicitly naming the powers and structures that were perpetuating injustice. Finally, the Kairos document rooted prophetic theology in a scriptural hope and imagination for a future characterized by justice and flourishing for all people, as well as a commitment to action towards this future. The times that we currently find ourselves in, although of course with significant differences, have much in common with the context into which the Kairos document was written. In these times, we see the church overtly and intentionally using scripture to justify, sanction, and sanctify the unjustifiable, unsanctionable, and unsanctifiable, namely Israeli settler colonialism, occupation, apartheid, and even genocide. This is what the Kairos theologians described as state theology in disgraceful technicolor. We also see the church's less overt, but no less harmful support for this injustice through its silence on the matter, its failure to name and stand against evil and injustice due to dishonest claims to neutrality and apoliticality, its failure of social analysis and absurd prescriptions of peace and reconciliation, which take no cognizance of the deep injustice that precludes such, what the Kairos theologians described as church theology. In such times, it's crucial that people of faith do some serious social analysis and theological reflection in order to challenge the church to a prophetic theology, a theology after Gaza. All of us owe a debt of gratitude to those that are leading the charge on this in these times, and particularly the 4 contributors who will be sharing on this panel. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I am sending much love and solidarity.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for those of the folks that are attending on Zoom, not Zoom, sorry, who are on the YouTube live stream, and to our good friend Atalia, who is joining us on Zoom. Atalia Omar is at Notre Dame University and is faculty member in Peace and Conflict Studies. She's coming to us from the great state of Indiana this evening, sending regrets that she could not make it here in person, but she is here in spirit and on the TV screen. Next, we have Dr. Adam van der Tuig, who is at the Highlander Center, good friend of mine from seminary and he has been an active person with Christians for a Free Palestine, doing a lot of activism and direct action in the capital and other places. Next, we have Christine Pei, who is at Denison University, teaching Christian ethics, broadly speaking. And I just met Christine this evening, and it turns out we have a lot of intersections of points of unity. So it's very exciting for me. And the person that we are very grateful to be here with us from Bethlehem, Palestine, we have Reverend Professor Mitri Raheb, who is known as the most prolific Palestinian theologian that has been published broadly, probably to date. And he is here with us, bringing that experience here to us here in Atlanta. So I want to thank you all for being here, but I also want to thank all of our panelists, both on Zoom and here in the room. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Dee, and I do a bunch of things, and that's all you need to know about me. This book, Theology After Gaza, is an anthology. It was just released earlier this month. You will be able to purchase it downstairs after the event, so I highly recommend you stick around for that. And I just sped-read this in 3 days, and it is an incredible text, so I highly recommend it. And you are going to be hearing from 4 of the authors that have items within this anthology tonight. So as Tandi mentioned in her introduction, the church is overtly and intentionally using scripture to justify, sanction, and sanctify the actions of Israel. We often hear the narrative that when Zionist settlers arrived in Palestine, they found a land with no people. This dominant narrative erased the violence against Palestinians during the Nakba and has continued to cause decades of harm towards the Palestinian people. So I would like to ask our panelists, if you were to pick just one example of how this harmful story has resurfaced over the last 23 months of genocide in Gaza, what would that one be? And Mitri, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Dee, and good to be with all of you this evening. Thank you for coming. You have heard the slogan, a people without a land for a people without a land, a land without a people for a people without a land. And this narrative has been around for actually over 150 years. It was actually in Europe, in Great Britain, that this slogan was first heard, and not by Jews, but by Christian Zionists. So it's a Christian Zionist slogan, actually. Believe it or not, all Israeli politicians in the last 50 years actually have used it, from Golda Meir all the way to Netanyahu today. And so I would like to start with this quotation from a lecture that Netanyahu gave at MIT in 1978. And I quote, he said, "There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. It is not as if we came and threw them out and took their country. They didn't exist." This is at the MIT, you know, at the cream of the cream, right, of this country. Now, the same Netanyahu, on October 27th, 2023, at a press conference when he announced that the Israeli troops are going into Gaza, he quoted 1 Samuel 15:3, which God is saying, "Now go smite Amalek, do not spare anyone, kill man, woman, young, old, ox and sheep." So God is calling for a genocide. And it's important to see this change that has taken place within Israeli society. From rendering the Palestinians as invisible to rendering them as eliminable. This is the change that we are experiencing, from being invisible to becoming eliminable. And actually just an hour ago, this last hour, Israel had 35 strikes on Gaza within 1 hour. That is in a city that has right now 1 million people that are frightened, including the small Christian community who are in the 2 churches. So, and this making our people eliminable as we speak, which we find unfortunately in the Bible, but this is being actually done today, and nobody can say we did not know.
Dimitri, Italia, I will turn to you next.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and again, I regret not being able to be there in person tonight. And yeah, I agree with everything that Professor Mitri said. I would like to highlight or underscore the point about this notion of the terra nullius, of the supposedly empty land, and how deeply rooted it is in Christian Zionism, and to highlight that Jewish Zionism, as it is now embodied in the this Israeli state project, is a form of kind of Christian colonization of Jewish consciousness and reality, and that phrase, "a land without people for people without a land," was first actually used by a Protestant teacher, Alexander Keith, in a book about the covenant in 19th century England. And with respect to the past 2 years of genocide, it's very important to note that this notion of the terra nullius, of the empty land, was immediately associated with respect to kind of the Jewish Israeli public as a form of miracle, where the actual miracle is the kind of complicity and, I guess, credit. The language was also one of credit that Israel has received from the so-called international community to engage in that genocidal assault, that the objective of which is to turn the land into terra nullius. Because from the very early, from the inception of Zionism as a settler colonial movement in Palestine, it was clear to people like Jabotinsky, who is the ideological kind of father of Netanyahu, that there were people in the land. The land, in fact, was not empty. And that the nature of the relationship is one of force, power, and violence. And throughout, if you do take kind of the long historical lens, you see that there were always kind of like moments of opportunities to gain more land, because the principle of settler colonialism is to maximize land, minimize people on the land, and it's driven by like as Patrick Wolf talks about, but before him, Palestinian scholars like Fayez Sayeh and Edward Said is about maximizing land and minimizing people on the land. And so what we have right now is, of course, under the kind of the fog of the assault on Gaza, we have that massive annexation and depopulation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and also all kind of issues regionally. But you also have the American government, and Trump talks about clearing Gaza and turning it into the Riviera of the Middle East, and which reflects, it kind of echoes what his son-in-law said a few months before that, talking about Gaza as a beachfront property. And I say it because it really highlights a moment where, yes, Zionism and the current realities can be understood in reference to Christian Zionism and theology and so forth, but there is something very material foundation to it about kind of this developer, this focus on land, where it's kind of like a moment where the theology is no longer necessary. It's just so kind of naked that facade was dropped in that moment, and then it's something that was immediately the so-called Trump plan that was articulated in that first press conference after the first meeting after the second Trump administration. Now it has become kind of like the slogan within the Israeli context that they have that basically green light. But in the context of Israel, you have that Amalek language that authorized basically it's an interpretation of the moment through kind of like a basically genocide commandment, and also it is framed. I mean, it's really kind of like a moment of opportunity, a miracle. So this is how, but going back, the Balfour Declaration was considered to be a miracle. Even in some respects, the Holocaust was a moment of kind of opportunity. And so it's important to bring that long historical lens to see how there are moments of opportunities to gain more land, to make more land, quote unquote, empty. Thank you.
Thank you, Atalia. Adam.
Thank you, Dee, and thanks for everybody for being here. Dee sent these questions ahead of time, and when I first read this one in particular, the thing that came to mind immediately were the images of Palestinians being displaced, and the images, the drone footage of what looks like moonscape in Gaza. If this was a land without a people, who are the millions of people that Israel's displacing on the hour for the last 2 years? And who is living in all those buildings that they've just leveled? So when I think about, the question is about one particular story. I guess I'm thinking more of images, because we know that this is people have been saying it's the first genocide live streamed. So we see these images and they're right there. So the genocide betrays the lie in that sense. I'm also drawn to the word erasure in this question. Dee asked a little bit about erasure. The colonization isn't just people, it's also things like trees. So I'm doing a paper right now that I'll present at the end of next month at a conference on Israeli afforestation. And I'm building on a chapter in a book by Sari Makdisi called Tolerance is a Wasteland. I cannot recommend that book enough to you. Sari Makdisi, Tolerance is a Wasteland. In the first chapter of that, he writes about Israel's project of afforestation. And the erasure happens, and then there's an erasure of the erasure. And what he means by that is that there are human settlers settling historic Palestine, and they were all planting trees over Palestinian villages that have been demolished. And these trees serve to erase people, erase history. And the chapter is brilliant. Like I said, I can't recommend it enough. My paper is going to be kind of a theological look at what it means to be planting trees that are not native to Palestine in Palestine, because European Zionists they settle Palestine, but they want Palestine to look like home in Europe, so they're planting European trees in Palestine. My paper is going to be a theological look at this. What do we do when this is happening in the Holy Land? The Holy Land. We are erasing the land of Palestine, not just the people. We meaning, I pay my taxes, so it's me. It's me. That's what came to mind first.
Thanks, Adam. And Christine.
I think it's on now. Yeah, thank you. So this question really forces me to think about what it takes to deny and erase a person's existence. So I'm Christine Pei, and you can see me and hear my voice, and if you sit close enough and you can smell my hair. But how can you deny my presence and my personhood? So for the past 23 months, we have witnessed how Israel has been trying to create truly a land without people. So the Israel's genocide in Gaza has been operated based on the logic of a land without people. And certainly Gaza doesn't belong to Israel, and Israel knows it exactly. And because Israel does not have any relationships with Gaza or historical memories of this land, Israel can invade, bomb, and destroy Gaza without any guilty feelings. So for Israel, Gaza is the object to conquer and domesticate. To accomplish this goal, Israel has attempted to turn Gaza into a clean slate where Israel can begin its development project only for Jews without Palestinian people. So if there are no people in Gaza, that means these people have been either erased or displaced. So a land without people is nothing more than the Zionist desires over Palestine. So it's only desire or illusion, it's not truth. And also when the media shows the war and genocide in Gaza, all we can see are often rubble and body bags. And rubble and body bags signify the erasure of Palestinians in Gaza, their sophisticated civilization, cultural legacy, houses of worship, libraries, schools, and hospitals, as if Palestinians were always refugees living in tents and on the streets. What the world has repeatedly heard is how Israel has killed and erased the Palestinians rather than how Palestinians have lived, survived, and resisted. So talking only about death is also a form of erasure to me, as if Palestine existed without people or only with dead people. So how can we contest this Zionist propaganda of Palestine, a land without people? That's my primary theological thinking. So certainly we must continue to condemn the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the genocide in Gaza loudly. At the same time, we must learn and tell the long history and memories of Palestinians on their land, their culture, and their religious traditions. Both actions are crucial these days because Israel erases the physical existence of Palestinians as a groundwork to erode everything related to Palestine while presenting Israeli-born Jews and Jewish settlers as indigenous to Palestine.
Thank you all. Next, we'll go into some more of this propaganda. So it's commonly said that every accusation that Israel makes against Palestinians is actually a confession of their own actions. However, the West, and particularly our Western church, has fallen prey to this propaganda. Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac has rightly named the silence of the Christian church in the West as complicity in genocide. So, for each of you, considering your positionality, your scholarship, and your personal social location, what do you think the church needs to do in order to right this wrong? And I'll start with you, Christine.
My microphone works very well this time. Yes, I affirm that every accusation Israel makes against Palestinians is a confession of their own actions. As Reverend Isaac says, the mainstream Christian church, especially in the West, has been silent about genocide in Gaza. In silence, the church has taken part in the genocide either ideologically or materially. And I'm a Korean-American feminist theologian and ethicist. I'm a first-generation Korean living in the United States. But that the Christian church in the West should include the global Christianity heavily influenced by Western Constantinian and imperialist Christianity. So recently, I had the opportunity to research and write about Christian Zionism in Korea, my home country. I learned that Korean Christian Zionists share the Christian triumphalist, imperialist desire with their counterparts, American and British Christian Zionists, although South Korea is a post-colonial country. So these Christian Zionists interpret Korea's economic development and military power as God's blessings. In that way, they claim that Korea is also chosen by God alongside Israel and the United States. So self-identified as God's chosen people, Korean Christian Zionists have supported South Korea-Israel relations in weapon trades, security technology, educational and cultural exchange, and startup businesses. In particular, Korean Christian Zionists believe that God chose them to bring the gospel back to Jerusalem because Korea is located at the crossroads between the West and the East. So if you understand the whole world map, the Christianity, the gospel began in Jerusalem, and then it went to west, through Europe and North America, and then finally arrived in South Korea, and then the gospel will be handed over to Jerusalem through Central Asia. So certainly, in this Korean Christian Zionist illusion, Korea is a Christian empire. Even if Korea is not empire, but they believe that it's empire, and then spiritually they joined the empire of Israel and the United States. So Christian Zionism, in terms of Christian triumphalism, Manichaeanism, and millenarianism, has been normalized in South Korean church. Even if many Korean Christians disapprove of the current genocide in Gaza, they do not necessarily question Israel as God's chosen nation or the book of Revelation as prophesizing about the end of the world. So what can the church do here? Well, many things, but I suggest only 3. So first, the church must continue to speak against the war, genocide, and militarized violence loudly. Second, the church can reground itself in the long tradition of active nonviolent resistance so that Christians can be liberated from the fear of violence and complicity in injustice. And third, the church should meet people where they are. So every church needs Christianity 101 course, which can help people challenge and question the notion of God's chosen people and the Christian apocalypse.
Thank you. Adam?
I asked Dee before we started to flag me if I ramble. I prefer writing because I can organize my thoughts better, so I apologize if this is a rambling answer. I think there are occasions in which it is perfectly acceptable and even probably preferable for the Christian church to be silent. And that's when we are listening to or reading the stories of Palestinians. And I think beyond that even, I would extend that to, I've been thinking, I cannot be the first person to think in this direction, but I think about what liberation theologians talked about in terms of God's preferential option for the poor. And I think I would add to that God's preferential option for the political prisoner of empire. So I think, someone like George Jackson comes to mind. We should maybe be issuing copies of Blood in My Eye to our confirmation classes in the ELCA. And I say this as someone whose dad and uncles and cousins are all ELCA pastors. I think to correct for the silence, we need to loosen ourselves up and put our respectability on the shelf. And if Jesus himself was detained and tortured and lynched by agents of the imperial state, then the gospel's claim on me is to go be and study and struggle with other political prisoners of empire. And if we do that, I think we see a lot sooner what's been happening in Palestine for at least a century. We need to elevate our consciousness. I keep saying we. Obviously I'm a white guy. I'm Lutheran. Was born and raised rural Nebraska. So just to situate myself, okay. I do believe the church needs to see Jesus and the apostles and the disciples who were detained and imprisoned. That should say something about our analysis and how flat and unsophisticated our political analysis as Christians is. It's offensive to me. And I say it as someone who was raised in it and looks back at it, and I'm like, I sometimes say in my family, or I should be careful about this. I sometimes tell people that my experience of the church was in a lot of ways very, very positive. We know how to do care well, in my experience. We know how to do hospitality well, in my experience. But it's not clear to me that we have an understanding that the world is not one great big ball of Mayberry, North Carolina, as depicted on the Andy Griffith Show. Because being in just the church world that I grew up in, you would think it was. And it's not. Andy had like a little pistol on his side. Is that what we see around here? So it's to me, correcting this, we should be listening to key people, key constituencies, Palestinians. And we should be reading, we should be silent enough to read Palestinians. And then we need to mature our political analysis as Christians, baptized in the death of Jesus. In my tradition, we were baptized into the death and to the life and the resurrection of Jesus. We don't spend enough time thinking about what it means to be baptized in the death of Jesus.
Thank you, Adam. Mitri.
There are some churches that are doing great work. And I like to highlight that. Because sometimes I feel maybe we are too harsh on the church. So now I'm here speaking as a Palestinian, okay? We are sitting here in a church. And this church opened its door for this panel. The denomination, Presbyterian in this case, spoke against genocide. UCC disciples, and they paid the price. I know when the Presbyterian Church, for example, spoke many years ago when I was at the General Assembly, the APAC had a full page in New York Times against the church. This morning we were at the seminary here, met with students, and it's not the first time. So there are some churches doing something. So where is the problem? Why is the church, part of the church, complicit? And what can we do? I tell you why church is complicit. Because if you are a pastor in a church in North America, you want to have good relations to the rabbi next door. And the late Jewish liberation theologian Mark Ellis said and spoke about the so-called ecumenical deal. The ecumenical deal is the pastor and the rabbi meet and they are good friends as long as the pastor recognizes the Holocaust and he doesn't talk about Palestine. So what can the church do? Something very simple. I would like every pastor to go to the neighboring rabbi and tell him, look, we have to talk. You were talking for the last 70 years and I was listening. Now it's time for me to talk and you have to listen. Once that is done, I think change will be much more clear and visible to us. So this is Atalia for you. I just
Yep.
made the segue.
Good segue, Atalia.
Yeah, well, in terms of my positionality, I think this is important to explicate at this point, but my contribution to the book, Theology After Gaza, and of course, the genocide is still ongoing. I mean, we met in May 24 to start kind of talking to one another, but in my contribution, I talk about what does it mean, what would it mean to excavate the Jewish tradition from the debris of Gaza, because it's such a, I mean, there can be no Jewish thought or Jewish tradition, Jewish ethics that is not centrally that does not centrally wrestle with the genocide. But it's also important to know that that at the center of the conversation should not be Jewish repair, but rather showing up together in the struggle against the genocide, against colonialism. And I actually take a lot of, recently I had the great pleasure to really study deeply, and that connects to Tandi's remarks in the beginning, to study deeply the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa through the life and work of my colleague, the University of Notre Dame, Professor Ibrahim Musa, who was really centrally involved in the anti-apartheid struggle in that interfaith, space that was created, and people show up for that. I mean, there is a lot of kind of deep theological, religious interrogation, and especially it depends in your own positionality. If the church authorizes the sinful structure, then you have to wrestle it in a particular way. But the point is to show up in that as a struggle that is one struggle that is not differentiated according to this theology or that theology, because that would be that will entail replicating kind of the colonial logic. And so for me to be included in this book, and I'm so thankful for Mitri that you invited me into this book, is exactly that. This is what it means. And really at the heart of it is the interrogation of how this particular harmful theology, Zionism is a theology, both in its Christian and Jewish registers. How did it come into being? What other kind of structures and convergences and facilitated it, enabled it? You cannot understand this harmful, violent theology without understanding modernity, colonialism, and so I just wanted to highlight one thing, or two interrelated points, just telegraph them. One is that Zionism is deeply embedded in anti-Semitism. And so one of the key challenges is really to understand that. First, to understand that philo-Semitism or Christian Zionism is as deeply anti-Semitic as anti-Semitism in the classical sense. And that Jewish Zionism emerged in a particular moment in European history in ways that, if you read actually the early sources of Jewish Zionist thinkers, you will see the internalized anti-Semitism, the internalization of Europe as a project with all its ills and issues. And having said that, I'm in a position right now where I'm being told by Christian in the United States that I'm not really Jewish, and even that I'm not really Israeli. When I offer, when I kind of from the very beginning of the genocide, strongly came out and spoke, and I will never shut up. And so this is really kind of that. I want to highlight the absurdity where it's even no longer necessary for like in Project Esther, which is the addendum for Project 2025, which is what was kind of the document produced by the Heritage Foundation that is really about promoting a particular anti-human rights agenda in the United States. Actually, it explicitly says, it is a convergence of different kind of forms of Christian Zionism and Christian nationalism. It explicitly says that it doesn't you don't actually, we Christians, we know better what it means to be Jewish. And so to the degree that there are, Jewish critics like Jewish Voice for Peace, they are not really Jewish. So this is a very, very scary kind of territory of that highlights kind of new developments that are rooted in the particular kind of particular history that, of course, also plays itself out in Palestine. So I want to say it is Christian European history playing itself out, but in Palestine on the bodies of Palestinians, but also I want to take full ownership and centered Jewish responsibility and agency and accountability.
Thank you, Atalia. So on this idea of talking and learning from one another, since at least the early 1900s, leaders in the Roman Catholic tradition have referred to Palestine as the fifth gospel. They call it this because it is the place where Jesus lived and ministered, and without it, you cannot have a full education on Palestine. I'm curious to hear our panelists' personal thoughts on what you think the importance of putting Palestine in the curriculum, or Palestine being on the syllabus in each and every single theology and religious studies class, full stop. So how important do you think it is to put Palestine in the syllabi of the classes in theology and religious studies programs? And I'll start with you, Atalia.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I do. I put Palestine in every syllabus that I teach. I mean, partly it's also on the issue of the importance, and actually that goes back to Adam's plug to the book by Sari Makdisi, which I agree is a really profound and important contribution that really highlights the importance of challenging the epistemic forms of violence. So how the issue of knowledge and knowledge production, and of course Sari Makdisi, who is a nephew of Edward Said, is within that genealogy where it's so critical. I mean, what is a syllabus? It's about knowledge, and we make choices when we draft a syllabus, when we construct a syllabus, and it's profoundly important to both first to really puncture the epistemic forms of violence that really underpins the kind of dehumanization of Palestinians that results in this, that manifests in the current genocide. But of course, the genocide is rooted in a long, century-long of Nakba, of ongoing catastrophe, of depopulation of Palestinians, and it is predicated on this dehumanization, and it is very important to interrogate how religion and theology participates in and authorizes those structures of violence. So for me, as someone who's in religion, ethics, and politics, it's very important to highlight kind of the epistemic forms of violence, in order to also open up and really complexify how we understand the role of religion in peace building and conflict transformation. It cannot be as simplistic as in, oh, religion can be bad and religion can be good. It has to be embedded within an analysis of history, of historicism, of structures, of politics, of geopolitics. It has to be intersectional, embedded, and embodied kind of analysis. And so highlighting the kind of the epistemic forms of violence by really being very intentional. For me, I'm teaching this course, this semester, a course on religion, nationalism, and settler colonialism with a focus on Palestine and Israel. And I explain to the students why I'm assigning, who am I assigning, and I'm being very intentional in assigning Palestinian scholars. Like Palestinian scholars talked about their realities of settler colonialism before Patrick Wolf talked about it. And much later. So it's very important, and only then, when you understand how that first of all that Zionism is not Judaism, then you can also explain how a process of transformation and reinterpretation and rescripting, the kind of the constructive aspect, the hermeneutical, can happen, and introduce the students to those voices once they have a really complex analysis of how religion and theology connects to violence.
Thank you, Atalia. Mitri.
Is Palestine the fifth gospel, really? I mean, I wrote about it. There is, if you look, you will find an article by me with this title. But now, actually, I came to the conclusion that Palestine is not the fifth gospel. It's the first gospel. Why? Because without Palestine, there is no gospel. Which means, I mean, if God chose Palestine for Jesus to be sent there, then we cannot avoid talking about Palestine. I mean, the entire Bible is about Palestine. And if you look at the maps in if you have a Bible from your grandma, you look back in the maps in the back, it said always Palestine until it was changed to become Israel. So we need to reclaim that. The other thing is when the late Catholic priest, I forgot now his name, who spoke about the fifth gospel, what really he meant was not only to study about Palestine in Sunday school, but actually you will never understand the Bible unless you visit Palestine. You know, there is this great Western theologian, who wrote a book about the Good Samaritan, and he was struggling why the Bible says, he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he tried to do a huge, theological theory about going down. But if you went to Palestine, you know that, Jerusalem is 2,000 foot above sea level, and Jericho is 1,000 below sea level. So you have to go down. It's our geography. It's not about, And so, for me, it's important not only to talk about Palestine, but to visit Palestine. And not to do a Holy Land trip. And not to visit Israel, but to visit Palestine. And to meet with the people, because this is where the transformation takes place. You know, I was talking to somebody this morning actually, and he was saying, you know, if you are an average American and you listen only to mainline media in this country, you will never ever know what's really happening in Palestine. To know, you have to go there to talk to the people. You have to stand in front of the wall. You have to see the checkpoints. You know, you have to hear the voices from the people in Gaza. This is when Palestine becomes a reality. And this is why in Kairos, Palestine, we said, come and see. Come and see. That seeing actually is the transformative moment. And once you are back, you can be the witness of what's happening. Because the picture, you know, that you get here is not only one-sided. You hear, you know, 2 days ago, someone was talking about the dual narrative. I'm not against dual narratives at all, but you know, for the last 100 years, you were hearing just the one narrative. And we start to open our minds, you say two narratives. Why didn't you say that 100 years ago? So, it's Palestine.
Palestine. I love that as the first gospel. I'm going to publicly call out a few people right now while we have this on topic. Our good friend Ed will be leading a delegation to Palestine in March of 2026, and I will be leading one in December of 2026. So for all of you here in the room and all of our friends on Zoom, you have at least 2 people tonight you could talk to if you want to go and see. I can't say enough about that. So now we get to the crux, to go to Christine. Yeah.
Yeah, to answer this question, I want to think about how the erasure of Palestine has taken multiple forms. If you research, if you search Israeli restaurants on Google Maps, you are likely to have all sorts of Mediterranean restaurants, including Palestinian restaurants. So Palestinian food is appropriated by Israelis, and plants, trees, and fruits indigenous to Palestine are now used as the official and unofficial symbols of Israel, as if Jewish settlers and Israeli-born Jews have become indigenized in Palestine. Yet Palestinians are the living proof that has resisted this erasure. So their resistance takes multiple forms, including arts, performance, dance, film, and culinary arts. All are explored at Dar al-Kalima University in Bethlehem. So therefore, Palestine should appear across diverse disciplines beyond the theology and religious studies to remember his stories of victims and to envision creative resistance. However, because I'm trained in Christian social ethics, I will focus on Christianity. So Palestine is crucial to understanding the events of Jesus and the communal resistance to the Roman Empire in the 1st century. So during the Nazi Holocaust, German theologians whitewashed Jesus in support of Nazi racist eugenics. In her book, Aryan Jesus, Susan Helsel documents this theological project very well. And after the Holocaust, especially after the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, Christian theologians and New Testament scholars in the West intentionally emphasized the Jewish identity of Jesus, calling him a Jewish prophet. While American and European theologians were interested in the religious identity of Jesus, or Jewish identity of Jesus, many liberation theologians in the post-colonial world emphasized how and where Jesus and his followers lived and birthed revolutionary visions, Palestine. The Korean Minjung theologian An Byung-moo emphasized the Palestinians in Galilee who followed Jesus, resisted imperialist violence, and reassemble the Jesus community after Jesus' death. So without Palestine, Christians cannot rediscover the revolutionary vision and power shared among the followers of Jesus. And the Roman Empire certainly beat these Palestinians in Galilee, but failed to discourage them from losing their faith, the faith in God who created this world as paradise. So God loved this world so dearly and deeply. Yes, Palestine is the first gospel. So to make a long story short, I'm unable to discuss Palestine freely in theological or religious studies settings. But however, I can engage with Palestine more freely in other academic settings, especially women's and gender studies and so on. So strategically, we have to put Palestine here and there. As an educator, I feel like just teaching only about Palestine, you can be sanctioned or you can be censored. But if you put Palestine in your Christian social ethics class, Bible class, and women's and gender studies class, and sociology and anthropology, and here and there, you can have fuller pictures of Palestine and can have diverse perspectives on Palestine.
Thank you. Adam?
I'm going to try to be a little more composed with this answer. I tend to run warm, just constitutionally. I love the idea of, if it's done well, of including Palestine on every syllabus in seminary. I know better than to trust that every seminary is going to do that for the reasons Christine just mentioned. One reason I would love for that to happen is a reason that, I'll put it this way. Right now, I'm Lutheran, ELCA. Through the Nebraska Synod, I'm teaching this course right now called Not Your Bible is Israel. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because I know, I was at church at the Crossroads in Glen Ellen last weekend. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that conference. And one of the openings to a session was a video clip. There's a gentleman doing a new documentary on Palestine, and it opens with politicians of both parties essentially conflating or explicitly conflating biblical Israel with modern-day Israel. And I even emailed Mitri some months ago. I was like, Mitri, I know this is cynical. I know it's wrong, but I lack the language. Who should I read? And Mitri sent a few names, and so I'm offering this course, not because I'm an expert, because I'm trying to start a conversation. And I've heard pastors say, I have congregants coming up to me after church, and they're saying, should we be singing these hymns right now, given everything that's going on over there? And it demonstrates a kind of confusion and a conflation, and I think people can sense it's wrong, but they don't have the language for. So I'd love for seminaries to do it, but I'd also love for churches to do it, and kind of like the way that we're doing it. We're trying to, I've read a bibliography's worth of books on it. I'm not an expert, but I have stuff to share. But we're trying to, because, for us, you go to church on Sunday morning, you hear Israel in the hymns, you hear it in the readings, you hear it in the sermons. It's just everywhere. And it's kind of imprinted, it's just, in my experience, it's kind of in you, and then you hit this moment, you're like, wait, I know this is wrong, but how? And so we're trying to do that. We're essentially trying to make up for education that we didn't get in that sense. I had, when I first read this question, I had Professor Cornel West in my head, talking about Jesus as the Palestinian Jew. I did my PhD at Union, so Professor West, if you're watching, please, will you teach a course on Jesus as the Palestinian Jew? That's interesting. I think a lot of people would benefit from that. I think the other thing I would add to the answer is that, I want to make clear, I love my family. I love the place I grew up. I love the church. I love all those things. I don't mean to be totally critical. But there is a lot of work to be done. I think if the issue were on seminary syllabi or even adult ed church syllabi, my wife and I got done at Union in New York City. We moved back to my home state, and we were really involved with our church in this city, and we knew it would be kind of hard to find one that replicated that. It was a really special place in New York City. It's a place that offered its space to Columbia students and professors who'd been banned from campus after the encampments. So we opened our doors so that those classes could finish class, because students were literally, I mean, we all know they were kicked out of their homes and banned from campus. So I love our church in the city. We came back, and we've been trying to find a church home. And we went to one in Advent. We visited a Lutheran church in Advent. And in order to enter the sanctuary from the parking lot, you have to enter the basement, and then you go upstairs. And so we walked in. I'd never been there before. And in the basement, they'd done like a Bethlehem thing. Like they turned their basement into Bethlehem with little booths, and it was in the bulletin. They're doing an evening in Bethlehem as part of the Advent stuff. I think it was primarily aimed at kids. So we walked up, we walked back through to the car, and my wife was white hot angry. I think she's watching right now. I love you, wife. I'm sorry. She was white hot angry because she said, that's not the Bethlehem I know. She said, I've been there, and I've seen the bullet holes. And so there's this sense of like, we just live in this fairy tale. It's not that way now, and it wasn't that way when Jesus was born either. It wasn't this fairy tale. It was imperial domination. So I'd like to think if these issues were on our syllabi in every class in seminary, it would go a long way to control for some of these confusions and conflations and frustrations.
Absolutely. And now we come to the big, the big difficult question. So given what we've talked about, and given the realities on the ground in Palestine, especially in Gaza, what does a theology after Gaza look like? And I'll start with you, Adam.
My chapter in the book has to do with Christian media. I was at Columbia Theological Seminary earlier today, and I walked in a building and I saw issues of the Christian century in the foyer, and my chapter is on the Christian century. So take a look. But I think Christians, people of the Word, in the Lutheran Church, everything is Word. Word, word, word. Baptism, word and water. Sacrament is the Word itself. Word, word, word. We need to do better with words. We need to do better reading words and thinking about words. We need to do better speaking words and writing words. And I think that comes from, one way to do that is to engage media as a site of struggle. Engage narrative as a site of struggle. Don't cede that territory to Christian fascists and nationalists and Zionists. Edward Said was like, everybody thinks like, I'm going to write the piece in the New York Times that's going to change, and like, I've been there, that's been me, I'm going to do it. And there's a book I read where he's like, don't worry, they're going to run it through Jerusalem, the bureau there, it's not going to go to print. He's like, I think in the text, he says something like, think more along the lines of the Des Moines Register. Your student newspaper, your hometown newspaper. I'm from a very, very small town, Nebraska, and one of the reporters was the uncle of my best friend. And if he were still there now, I'd knock on the door, and I'd be like, hey, could I run this piece? And by nature of our relationship and the trust that's in that relationship, I think maybe he would. And that would go a long way in rural red state Nebraska, wouldn't it? Maybe. So I think if it's zines, if it's just passing stuff out on campus or at your church, it's a site of struggle, and we shouldn't cede that territory.
Thank you. Atalia.
Yeah, this question is so difficult because the genocide is ongoing, and it's been ongoing for 2 years, and as we talked about, of course, it's connected to a longer process of a century-long Nakba, and like I want to just scream and say, you know, everyone needs to like stop with business as usual and just stop it, you know, stop it, like stop arming Israel. And then there is a lot of reckoning. And I want to highlight one important theme. So going back to Theodor Herzl, the so-called founding father of political Zionism, this assimilated Viennese Jew who wrote this pamphlet, Der Judenstaat, that only became kind of mobilized politically, as Mitri has written a lot about Christian Zionism, because of his relationship with this like Christian Zionists who introduced him to different kind of prominent people who could open doors for him and start kind of like materializing this idea. But he wrote about how he saw how deeply his conception of Zionism is embedded in kind of an imperial Eurocentric worldview, because he wrote, we should there, speaking about Palestine, form a portion of the rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. So that is just a quote from Der Judenstaat. It really demonstrates how kind of the Eurocentricity, the colonial discourse of the so-called civilization against barbarism, and then Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, in correspondence with George Antonius, wrote, we want to return to the East only in the geographic sense, for our objective is to create here a European culture. Again, that embeddedness, even though, yes, he took the book of Joshua and the conquest tradition and Zionism, even in its secular registers, is reenactment, a selective reenactment of kind of a biblical script. As my friend, Noam Raskakotzi, a Jewish Israeli scholar, said, secular Jews did not believe in God, but God gave them the land. That's kind of like really captures a lot. Ehud Barak, Israeli prime minister at one point, talked about Israel as a villa in the jungle, again reflecting that kind of civilizational Judeo-Christian discourse. And Netanyahu, just in 2017, he gave a speech in Budapest with Orban and another kind of, you know, Zionist who is anti-Semitic, to shows how it kind of like that consists with one another. He said, we are part of the European culture, Netanyahu said in Budapest. Europe ends in Israel. East of Israel, there is no more Europe. So this is just to highlight how deeply embedded Zionism is in kind of this Eurocentricity, civilizational discourse, and the very, very toxic construct of the so-called Judeo-Christian. Which is really at the heart of all these like theological issues that we discussed. This notion of the Judeo-Christian, which is a deeply violent construct. It's supersessionist, and of course, also now it is deployed in deeply, deeply Islamophobic and violent ways, in just kind of like what those quotes highlight. So in terms of what theology looked like after Gaza, a lot of the work that I have been doing is really to look at how people who are trying to kind of recover and uncover the Judeo-Muslim, the reality, the histories, how really the actual lived realities, including how the textual and theological influences in kind of the construction of Jewish discourse hermeneutics in relationship to Muslim texts, because this is a very important decolonial move to undo the violence of the Judeo-Christian.
Thank you, Atalia. Christine.
So honestly, do you think Christian theology that emphasizes love and compassion will survive after Gaza? Do you think people actually want to go to church just watching the most documented genocide in Gaza? Do they still want to go to church? Or do you still want to go to church after watching all of this? So since the death of Charlie Kirk, I have been surprised by how many Christians sincerely mourn the passing of Kirk, calling him a martyr, praying for his family, and claiming that his soul is resting in heaven. I've rarely heard American Christians sharing this kind of affective reactions to children, elderly people, women, and civilians who were shot and killed in Gaza. So I keep questioning why Christians respond to death selectively. So for the Theology After Gaza book, I cross-read the Korean War and the genocide in Gaza. If you want to learn about Korean War, you can talk to me after this talk. And after that, after my contribution to the Theology After Gaza, I began to imagine a Christian theology that actively listens to and engages with the silences of the dead. So I call this silence necropolitical silence to conceptualize how state-sanctioned violence targets the vulnerable, silences them, and ultimately kills them. So killing is the ultimate form of silence. And within Christianity, the death of Jesus is an archetypal necropolitical science because he was victimized by the violence of Roman Empire. And imperialist Christianity or Constantinian Christianity has been prosperous on top of Jesus' necropolitical silence. In this case, Jesus shouldn't speak. As soon as Jesus opens his mouth, the whole Constantinian and imperialist Christianity will collapse. So we certainly stand in a kairos moment, a decisive moment of judgment. We will continue to cling to a Christianity that rests upon Jesus' own necropolitical silence? Or will we recover the buried memories of liberation and resistance, choosing instead to embody love, justice, and ethical living, even in the face of the genocide? So killing is the ultimate weapon of reducing a person to absence. Killing reinforces necropolitical silence. However, the dead have never been wholly silent. So history's victims continue to speak in their silence, and our lives are already entangled with their unacknowledged presence. The question is whether we choose to trace those presences and listen to their silences. So as a method for Theology After Gaza, I propose listening to necropolitical silence by cross-listening and cross-reading the voices of the dead from multiple genocides beyond time and spaces. So how would Theology After Gaza look? I don't know. I'm an Episcopal priest. I don't know whether Episcopal Church will survive after Gaza, honestly. So at least that theology should come realize the wild dreams of all the victims of genocide.
Thank you. And Mitri.
I mean, Gaza is definitely a rapture in history. You know, when we thought about calling it Theology After Gaza, we were thinking that the church in the 50s and 60s and 70s of last century came to the realization that actually Christian theology led somehow to the Holocaust. Because there was so much demonization of Jews in Christian theology that when the Holocaust happened, people were numb. And we feel that we are at a similar moment where the Christian theology regarding Palestine, but also regarding so many issues, led to making us numb to what's happening in Gaza. I mean, imagine if a small Jewish community somewhere is attacked, the whole world, all the churches will have the next day something against it. So why are we silent? Why are we numb? So that's the one. But the other thing is, Gaza for me is like a microcosm of all the issues that we see in the world, but we really theologically never dealt with. So talking about settler colonialism, I mean, in my book I talk about the great prophet in this country, Brueggemann, and his book about the land. How can a liberal theologian like Brueggemann write a book about the land without mentioning the Native Americans? Tell me. Gaza is opening that chapter. We have to talk about it. Because that's not only the Palestinian experience, that's the experience of this country, that's the experience in South Africa, that's the experience in Australia, that's the experience in New Zealand, and you name it. Gaza is about all these demonizations of Arab and Muslims. Because when people look at Gaza, they see Arab and Muslims. And it's okay if they are killed. Gaza, it's about brown bodies. This is why in Ukraine, you know, they have blue eyes and blonde hair, so you support them against the occupation of Russia. And the same country supports the occupier in Palestine. So you have all of these issues actually in a concentrated form in Gaza, and it's like the Pandora box that is now opening, and it's a huge challenge, but we have to deal with it because, and Atalia said that we cannot look at what's happening in Gaza without looking at, you know, the whole history of colonialism and settler colonialism. So this is what we experience in Gaza. And this European project is supported with the hardware. You know, all these toys that are now bombing Gaza were not made in Israel. So Israel gets this hardware by Western countries, and the seminaries have been providing the software. And Gaza says it's time to crack this software. Because, you know, maybe the Germans can say we didn't know, but today nobody can say we didn't know what was happening in Gaza. I mean, right? And so sometimes when people ask me, what is your profession? I don't tell them I'm a pastor. I tell them I'm in the software cracking business. And I tell you, you know, we have so much software to crack, so let's do it.
Thank you. Yes, I think that that's a definition for me too. What am I doing here? I am a good trouble virus for this software. Yes. Before we move into a small window of time for some questions, please give a warm round of thank you to our panelists this evening. This is a joy for me, and I am so glad you are all here for this. So we do have a few moments of grace, hopefully, that we can extend into our community time. We have time for a few questions. We're going to have a microphone to be passed around because we do have attendees that are joining us online, and so that people can hear your questions. Use it like an ice cream cone, okay? Put it right up to your mouth. Just don't lick it.
I'm going to hold the
Oh,
ice cream
even
cone.
better, even better.
Okay. I don't have a question. I just wanted to share a comment. I'm a Muslim, and I see another Muslim in this crowd. Maybe there's some other Muslims that I don't know, but I wanted to thank you for creating this space. I'm ashamed to say I have not gone to such an event in a mosque where we are talking about theology after Gaza. So I deeply, deeply appreciate that you created this space, and I learned so much from hearing all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a question? We got one here and one in the back.
Hi, my name is Kevin. Thank you so much for your panel and your talk. I just wanted to ask how you see some of this currently happening in Palestine and Gaza and the movement for justice in response to the genocide in the context, the historical context of the Vietnam War and the protests against that and the church and theology through that lens, for a brief question.
I think that's for you.
I think the DNA always matters. I'm not saying eugenics. Memories of DNAs. And because we have anti-Vietnam War DNA in American society, we can resist the war on Gaza at this time. So even if, just as simply many people think that peace activism always fails because this big power always wages war, and Vietnam War, technically Vietnam War was not ended because of people's resistance, but because of just a simply political reason, and then the United States didn't have enough money. However, people remember how we resisted. And then that kind of memories continue to live through generation to generation, and that's why we can resist. But what is more important now, we have to, if you consciously study and think about one war, you can understand all different kinds of war. Just for instance, during the Vietnam War, North Vietnamese army was pejoratively called the Viet Congs, and everybody thought that the Viet Congs were, these Viet Congs did not respect the rules of engagement, but they were guerrillas. And the US and Israel criticized Hamas in the same way. And because of the rhetoric, nobody wants to learn about Hamas, the history of Hamas. And so it's like by studying more consciously about one war, we can see the connection between all different historical wars, and then how genocide has been constant pattern in every war, and that people's memories of resistance always hold ordinary people together. So, yes.
Maybe just, can I just add another dimension? Because the Vietnam War was actually a very important moment in the rise of Christian Zionism in this country. Because the same moment when the Vietnam War was going on, we had the 1967 war in Palestine. The US lost the war in Vietnam, Israel won the war. And so the Christian right in this country thought that the US lost the war because we are not anymore a Christian nation. But Israel is the Jewish nation, and they won the war because of that. And from that moment, we could see the rise of support to this project called Israel and to its war machinery, which is still going on. As we speak, Robio is in Jerusalem right now doing exactly that.
Anybody else have thoughts for that question? Okay, I think we had one more up here, back there, and then up here, and then that will be it.
And I wanted to kind of bring together two things said by a couple different panelists. One is the importance of distinguishing between Zionism and Judaism. And then the other is the work of the call explicitly made for pastors to talk to your colleagues who are rabbis. I feel like I want to bring those points into conversation with each other. And also kind of name that in Atlanta, this has been a really big point of contention and difficulty for a lot of people. A lot of pastors have come to me and said, what, I can't talk to the rabbis anymore, can you? And vice versa. So as we try to work together on this, if there are people who are in the room today who are maybe newly re-energized around doing that bridge building work, do you have advice for them? And also, has that ship sailed?
I wonder, what do you mean by has this ship has sailed? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because you're not local, I guess.
Thank you, Martha. What I mean by has this ship sailed on a local level is that not a single rabbi in Atlanta has been willing to make a public statement. And then on a broader level, I mean, there is a lot of small-scale grassroots organizing happening within the Jewish community, but I guess I really meant it on a local level.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is very important. I mean, it has been the case that part of my research has been on not my most recent book, but the book before is actually on American Jewish-Palestine solidarity activism. And I really studied that movement, the process of unlearning of Zionism that American Jews have experienced, and so many immediately showed up and flooded the streets and protested. And I think that it is important to, so they didn't emerge, the point is that they didn't emerge already a couple of days after October 7th, saying not in my name, never again to anyone, don't weaponize my grief, and all those slogans that capture so much about their process of unlearning and de-Zionization, and also their sense of urgency that they need to come out. You have rabbis for ceasefire, and so you have all this a Jewish social movement that was able to immediately mobilize because of a long process of building a movement. But the issue is that they are being dismissed as not really Jewish. So maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe it will be important for Christian spaces, Christian churches, to seek out those interlocutors who are, and who are, who go out to the streets, who mobilize, who protest, not despite being Jewish, but because they are Jewish. Because of their understanding of the profound tensions between the Jewish tradition and Zionism as a movement, with Christian Zionism predating by far Jewish Zionism. and how it is like everything that you talked about, entangled with whiteness, entangled with colonialism, where it's entirely consistent with kind of that weaponization of anti-Semitism is entirely consistent with kind of the Christian right agenda that is not good for Jews. So the point is maybe it's time to, because many of us are completely marginalized from, from like when you invite the Jewish representative, it will not be Jewish versus for peace. But we are there. So this is just a kind of an invitation to open up the space for, for a movement, really. Kind of like in South Africa, or in like the mobilization against apartheid there. I hope that gets to some of the points.
Thank you so much to all panelists for your presence and your presentation. Reginaldo Braga, Latin American, Presbyterian pastor, and a Freirian educator in an African American institution for a minute and a half now here in Atlanta. When I hear the presentation and the question on theology after Gaza, my mind went in so many different directions. 1886, the Berlin Conference, the rescribing of Africa, the rescribing of the so-called Middle East, so many things. Your presentation and your point about Palestine being such a mixture. From where I come from, the category of mixture has been, particularly lately, a category of resistance and reinvention of the world order, which has provoked such a white slash back from the time of Obama to the times that we are on the two terms of the current administration. I wonder if the connection between land and identity continues to serve us, either theologically or as agenda for dethrone the narratives that are on the media that is so performative, that it is so far away from relationality and an identity that is constructed in that mixture. So my question and my puzzlement, especially on the current experiences of the migrants right here and everywhere, from England to the United States, the Anglo-Saxon world continues to be white slashing all of us. What do we do with mixture? And Palestine being the mixture. To what extent the genocide is the genocide of all of these resistances that we have had?
Anyone? Adam?
Could you, I want to make sure that I understand your question before I try to handle it. You're saying, what do we do with being demixtured?
From what I heard, I think the question is asking about do theologies that are tied to land and place serve us anymore as one part of it, but also Palestine being kind of like this mixture of what is coming out, but also the like Gaza is the lens through which all of these anti-imperial struggles across the globe are kind of collapsing in upon, but also Gaza is lifting the veil. Is that an accurate representation? Okay.
I mean, I don't know if I have a good answer. I'll just be right now. I'd have to think about it. I guess the first thing that comes to mind, and I apologize if it doesn't answer this directly. I remember, so I've in this course I'm doing, Night Rabbis Israel, we will get to land claims, etc. And I intend, if we're able, to connect it to our local context. I've heard Mitri talk about, you want to do something, talk about it where you are, in your locale, etc. The thing that comes to mind is something I think what Winona LaDuke said, the indigenous scholar here. She said, you know, nobody really owns land, but there are people who belong on it. And I use that to think through some of these things. It's different when, I think if people are moving, and I mean my dissertation too, in my doctoral work was about the sacrament of baptism and water politics and ecocide. So I looked at a lot of, I was talking about it at dinner tonight, a lot of, we think about human migrants, but animals are migrating too. Plants are migrating too. I mean, at some point, we're all gonna like move for the most habitable places. So I think your question will continue to be an important one as we think through some of these things. I'm sorry if I don't have something better. I'd have to give it thought.
Maybe just two things I would like to say. First is, no, the issue of land is important, but there are two different ways of looking at the land. A Palestinian priest, one of the first who started writing Palestinian theology, Elias Shakur, that many of you maybe know, though he's Greek Catholic, but he's more Presbyterian maybe than Greek Catholic, wrote a book called We Belong to the Land. And this is the way indigenous people look at land. We belong to the land. The land is like the mother. While colonialists say the land belongs to us, and it becomes a commodity. And so there is this deep connection between indigenous people and land, and this is part of their and of our spirituality, that I don't want that to be lost. This is so important. So this is the first thing. The other thing, it depends. In the Bible, we have, there is a tension. And the tension is between this notion in the Old Testament where, you know, exile is something negative, which is negative, because it's forced. While in the New Testament, Jesus is saying, go into the whole world. And so there is this tension that I would like to keep. I wouldn't like to go just in one direction without the other. But it's always connected to, am I forced to leave my country, but I would like to stay there? Or I choose to change. These are two different kinds of things. And maybe the last thing I would like to say there is that, I mean, when it comes to identity, your question, I mean, I think every one of us today has multiple identities, not only like one identity. And we have hybrid identities that are also important. But I mean, think of this. Coming back to Gaza. I mean, when the people in Gaza, life is made unlivable so that people are forced to leave their home, their land, you know, the sea, etc. And then you hear President Trump saying, we would like to do Riviera there. There you see that, you know, so these are the people of Gaza. For them, Gaza is their home. while here comes the global capital who wants to do something. And so, yeah, so for the people in Gaza, land is important. If they are forced to leave, but if they are not forced to leave, you know, we have many Gazans living in the States from before, you know. We have so many Palestinians who left to Latin America, and today they are Latin Americans. They are not, you know, they are not Palestinians, though their roots are in Palestine. But that's a different story than forced displacement that is really wants to eliminate you and erase your everything. So then we have to fight, and then land becomes important.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the Petersons forward just to close us out this evening, and remind you all to join us downstairs for a bit for fellowship and books.
Well, first of all, is this on? Okay. Thank you so much to our panel. It's no way we can really thank you. Oh, okay. But I won't name them, but I do want to name Dee and Sarah as people who have really helped put this together. We appreciate the supporters of Theology after Gaza tonight, and they have some display tables downstairs that we hope you will see. Kareth Books and More, the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, Friends of Sabeel North America, the Institute for the Study of Christian Zionism, Bright Stars of Bethlehem, Joining Hands for Justice, Sahara Shrubs, CARE Georgia, the Rifat Mobile Library, and our wonderful compatriots in this struggle, the Jewish Voice for Peace of Atlanta. And Amy says you are welcome to join. New members meet this Wednesday, I think, evening, and she'll be downstairs at the table as well. To the audience here at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church and on live stream, thank you for being present to bear witness to the ongoing tragedy and the persistent hope of our Palestinian siblings. It's impossible to adequately express our thanks and our gratitude to the panel and Mitri for this evening. You have shared the truth and called us to hope and to meaningful action. We pray to the God of our faith for sumud as we walk together in advocacy for the Palestinian people. We continue to live in a world in crisis. Each of us must choose our path of advocacy. And you know the story of Palestine, when many in our country do not, certainly our government, do not know the story or choose to ignore it. I urge you to leave here tonight with renewed energy to continue making a difference. Early this year, an imam from Palestine was in Washington, D.C., and someone asked him, "Do you have hope?" And he answered, "Well, when I look down the road, I do not see hope. But then I turn the corner and I see the light of hope." So it must be for us. Let us leave here with a call of great urgency to turn that brings justice to be the community. That's where it happens, the community that is a catalyst to make the turn that brings dignity and justice to the Palestinian people.
Let us close with just a brief time of prayer. God of all peoples, times, and places, we give thanks for the fresh thoughts that have been shared with us this evening. We ask your blessing on those who have presented the fresh thoughts. Empower the people of goodwill in this country, in the Holy Land, and quiet the hate that sometimes crops up in our lives and in our thoughts. Oh God, be with us in our journey. Amen.
Thank you to our online folks. Thank you all for being here. You are most welcome in this space, and thank you for being here. Thank you for OPC. Thank you for hosts. Join us downstairs. There's baklava and a cheese and clementines and other snacks, so please don't let us leave with a full tray of baklava. Books are downstairs, both mobile library and Karis books and more, and the panelists will be down there presently. Thank you so much for being here.